The broken slave, the cold, dimly lit auction house, was filled with a strange, buzzing silence. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, oil, and fear. Rows of cages lined the walls, and inside each one was a broken soul alien slaves from all corners of the galaxy, each one treated like a mere object for sale. But among them, there was one who stood out. Her name was Rhea, but no one cared to ask. She had long, dark hair that had once flowed freely in the wind, but now it hung in messy strands over her pale face. Her eyes, once full of hope, had become empty, shut off from the world around her. She had been sold and traded for years, treated as nothing more than a pleasure animal by the highest bidders. Her life had been a series of cages, each one smaller than the last, until she had lost all sense of who she was. She had been born on a distant planet, a place where her kind were once revered. But now, the galaxy saw her kind as nothing more than tools. The galaxy had forgotten her people, forgotten what they were capable of. Rhea had been a soldier, a warrior, before they broke her. Today, however, something felt different. Rhea wasn't sure what it was. Perhaps it was the way the crowd shifted uneasily as the next auction began. Or maybe it was the way the air seemed to crackle with tension. She didn't know, but she could feel it deep in her bones. The human standing at the front of the room was different from the others. He didn't look at her like she was just another piece of meat. His eyes were calm, not filled with greed or hunger. He watched the auctioneer speak, but his focus was on her. Rhea tried not to meet his gaze, afraid that if she did, he would see the brokenness in her. "Lot 47, the auctioneer shouted, his voice cold and detached. "A rare specimen, very well trained. A perfect pleasure companion for any wealthy buyer." Rhea's heart sank. She had heard this same description countless times. It always ended the same: another buyer, another cage. She barely noticed. When the human stepped forward, his hand raising as if to bid. "How much?" The human asked quietly, his voice soft but firm. 100,000 credits. The auctioneer responded, not even looking at him. "And she's worth every credit. An exotic, rare find. You'll never find another like her." Rhea felt her heart skip a beat. She had been sold so many times, but never to someone like him. Most buyers didn't care about her past, didn't care about her soul. They just wanted her for her body, for her obedience. But this man, this human, he seemed to see something else in her. The bidding was fast and fierce, but it wasn't like before. She didn't feel the weight of the money or the desperation of the buyers. Instead, she felt something else, an odd sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. Could it be that this time someone might actually care? When the gavel struck, the auctioneer looked up at the man with a smirk. "Sold to the human at 100,000 credits." Rhea's breath caught in her throat as she was led out of the cage. Her hands were still bound by shackles, her mind racing with questions. Who was this human? Why had he bid for her? What did he see in her that others hadn't? As she was brought closer to him, she saw the man's face more clearly for the first time. His dark hair was messy, his eyes intense and full of purpose. He wasn't the type to stand out in a crowd, but there was something in his expression, something in the way he looked at her that made her heart race. "You're free now," he said, his voice low but sincere. Rhea blinked, confused. "Free?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he nodded. "No more cages, no more auction houses. You don't belong here." Rhea couldn't believe it. The words didn't make sense. No one had ever spoken to her like this. She had spent her life being sold, a broken thing tossed from one cruel master to the next. But this human, this stranger, he was offering her freedom. But how could she accept it? How could she trust someone again after everything that had happened? after everything that had been done to her. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small device, pressing it into her hands. This will release the shackles. You can walk away from here, if you want. Rhea stared at the device, her fingers trembling. She had been bound for so long. She didn't know what it would feel like to be free. She didn't know what it would mean to be her own person again. For a moment, she stood there, unsure. But then, something inside her stirred. Maybe it was the glimmer of hope, the strange, unfamiliar feeling that had been buried deep inside her for so long. Maybe it was the quiet, steady way this human looked at her, like he believed in her when no one else had. With a deep breath, she pressed the button. The shackles fell away with a soft click, and for the first time in years, Rhea stood tall. The unseen strength Rhea stood in the dim, quiet room, the chains that had bound her to a life of misery now lying on the cold floor. She flexed her hands, feeling the freedom pulse through her fingers. It was strange, almost unnatural, to be able to move without the weight of restraint. But this wasn't just about the physical chains. It was about everything that had been holding her down, the years of pain, humiliation, and fear. The human, Rylan, was watching her closely. His expression wasn't one of pity, but something else, something like understanding. It made her uncomfortable, but not in the way she had felt with other people. There was no judgment in his eyes, no disgust at her scars, or the marks that covered her body. It was as if he could see past all of it, straight into who she really was. She didn't know how to respond. She had never been free before. She had never had the luxury of choice. She had always been a tool, a weapon, or a plaything for others. But now, standing before this stranger, she had no idea what to do with her newfound freedom. "Where will I go?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Rylan took a step closer, his boots heavy against the floor, but his voice was calm, reassuring. "Anywhere you want. You don't have to stay here. You can go wherever you feel safe." Safe. That was a word she hadn't heard in years, and it felt foreign in her mouth. She had been hunted, sold, and discarded like garbage, but never safe. The galaxy had no room for people like her, people who were weak, broken, and unwanted. But somehow, standing in front of Rylan, something inside her flickered. The tiniest spark of something she hadn't felt in ages. Hope. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now," she admitted, her voice low. "I've been a slave for so long. I don't remember how to live any other way." Rylan nodded, his gaze soft but firm. "You're not alone in this. I'll help you find your path." There was something in his words that resonated with her. But doubt still clouded her mind. She was no one. She had no past, no future. She had been erased, made to feel like she was worth nothing. As if reading her thoughts, Raylan continued, "You were never worthless. Rhea, whoever told you that? They lied. I don't know your full story, but I know this. You're capable of more than you think." Rhea took a slow, hesitant breath. His words should have sounded empty, but somehow they didn't. She wasn't used to kindness, and even less to someone believing in her. Before she could respond, a loud bang echoed from the far end of the room. Rhea froze, instinctively moving into a defensive stance, her body remembering the countless times she had been forced to fight for survival. Rylan was quick, his hand already reaching for a weapon at his side, but before he could pull it out, Rhea shook her head. "It's not necessary," she said, her voice calm now, like a switch had flipped in her mind. He looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I know how to handle myself," she answered quietly, her eyes scanning the shadows beyond the door. "I've been through worse." Rylan stood still for a moment, studying her, and then slowly nodded. He could see it now, the fire that still burned within her. She wasn't a broken slave anymore. She was a fighter, Before he could speak, a group of armed men burst into the room. They were dressed in black, their faces masked, and they moved with practiced precision. The bounty hunters. They had found her. Rhea's pulse quickened, but instead of fear, a strange calmness washed over her. She wasn't powerless anymore. These men thought she was just another alien they could sell, just another piece of property to be moved around. They were wrong. Rhea's movements were swift. In an instant, she grabbed the nearest weapon off the table and lunged toward the first hunter. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even think. It was pure instinct, and it was beautiful. The fight was over in seconds. Her body moved with a grace and power she had never known before. The bounty hunters never had a chance to react. One by one, they were disarmed and forced to the ground, their weapons scattered. The room fell silent once again, save for the sound of heavy breathing. Raylan stood there, wide-eyed, watching her. He had known she was capable of handling herself, but this was something else. He had never seen anyone move like that so precise, so controlled. It was like she had been born for battle. Rhea dropped the weapon to the ground and looked at the men lying at her feet. "I don't want to kill anyone," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But if you come after me again, I won't hesitate." The bounty hunters scrambled to their feet, panic flashing in their eyes. They hadn't expected someone like her. No one ever did. "We'll be back," one of them spat, before turning and fleeing the room. Rhea didn't flinch. She had seen enough of the galaxy to know that this wouldn't be the last time someone came after her. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel helpless. She had power, and she was ready to use it. As the last of the hunters disappeared into the shadows, Rylan turned to her. "You're incredible," he said, his voice full of awe. She didn't respond right away. She was still processing everything. The fight, the freedom, the man standing beside her who had believed in her when no one else had. Rhea's lips curled into a small smile, something she hadn't done in ages. "I'm not broken anymore." Asterisk awakening the power, the silence that followed the confrontation was heavy, like the stillness before a storm. Rhea stood, her breath slow and steady, her heart racing from the fight, but not from fear. The power that had been dormant inside her for so long was awakening. Every muscle in her body felt alive, charged with energy she hadn't known existed within her. Raylan stood beside her, watching her closely. His eyes were filled with both awe and curiosity. He had known she was strong, but this was something else. There was something more to her, something that went beyond her physical strength. The way she fought, the way she controlled herself. It was clear she was no ordinary alien. "You're not like any of the others I've seen," Rylan said, his voice filled with wonder. "What are you really capable of?" Rhea looked at him, her expression unreadable. She had never been asked that question before. No one had ever cared enough to look beyond her exterior, to see that there was more to her than just a slave, just a weapon. She had been told so many times that she was broken, that she was worthless. But now, for the first time, someone was asking her what she could truly do. And the question made her feel something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I don't know," she replied quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've been told what I was, what they wanted me to be, but I never had a chance to find out what I really am." Rylan's gaze softened. "You have that chance now, and I'll help you figure it out." The sincerity in his voice surprised her. It made her want to believe him, want to trust that this time someone was truly offering her freedom. Not just freedom from the shackles that had bound her, but freedom to be herself, to explore who she was and what she could become. But with that freedom came a question she wasn't ready to answer. What if she couldn't control the power inside? Her? What if it consumed her? She had always been a tool, an instrument of someone else's will. What if that part of her never really went away? Her thoughts were interrupted when Ryland placed a hand on her shoulder. The touch was simple, but it grounded her. He wasn't asking her to become anything she wasn't. He was just asking her to trust him and to trust herself. "You don't have to figure everything out all at once," he said. "Take it one step at a time. I'm here with you." Rhea nodded, but the uncertainty lingered in her chest. She wasn't used to being cared for, to having someone stand by her side. For so long, she had been on her own, surviving in the shadows of the galaxy. But now, things were different. She wasn't alone anymore. As they made their way through the dimly lit halls of the building, Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She could feel it in the air, a strange tension, like the galaxy itself was watching them, waiting for them to make a move. The bounty hunters had been just the beginning. There was someone or something out there that wanted her, and they wouldn't stop until they got her. "We need to leave," she said, her voice firm, eyes scanning the shadows. "They'll send more, and they'll come for you too." Ryland's expression hardened. He had no intention of letting anyone take her. Not after everything she had been through. He had already seen enough of the galaxy to know that the kind of people who would buy and sell her weren't just going to let her slip away. "I've got a ship," he said. "It's not much, but it'll get us out of here. We need to leave before they come back." Rhea glanced at him, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. It wasn't just about escaping. It was about reclaiming something she had lost long ago. Her life, her power, her choice. As they reached the door, Rhea's instincts flared. She froze, and Ryland immediately stepped in front of her, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. He didn't need to ask what she had sensed. He could see it in her eyes. They were no longer alone. "Stay close," he murmured, his voice low and calm. A shadow shifted in the corner, and Rhea's eyes narrowed. There were more of them, more hunters, closing in on their position. But this time, she wasn't the one trapped. This time, she wasn't the one who needed to be saved. The door burst open, and a dozen armed men stormed into the room. They were fast, efficient, and dangerous. But Rhea had something they didn't will to survive, that no one could take from her. Without thinking, she moved. It was like her body had become a machine, each movement smooth and calculated, each strike landing with precision. She didn't wait for Ryland to act. She was already taking down the first of the men, her strength, her power fully unleashed. Raylan watched in awe as she fought. There was no hesitation in her actions, no fear. She was becoming something else, entirely something no one had ever seen before. A warrior, a force, a being that would not be silenced. The battle was over in minutes. The hunters lay defeated on the ground, their weapons scattered around them. Rhea stood tall, her chest heaving with the adrenaline of the fight. Her clothes were torn, her body bruised, but she didn't care. She had fought, and she had won. Rylan approached her slowly, his eyes filled with admiration. "I knew you. Had it in you," he said, his voice steady. "You're not just surviving anymore. You're fighting." Rhea didn't respond at first. Instead, she looked down at the fallen men. They had come for her, thinking she was just a slave, just a thing to be controlled. But now, they saw her for what she truly was. And in that moment, Rhea knew she wasn't broken anymore. She was something much stronger. "Let's get out of here," she said, her voice firm, her confidence building with each step she took toward the door. She wasn't just running anymore. She was taking control. Unseen enemies, Rhea and Rylan moved quickly, the sounds of their footsteps muffled in the narrow corridor. The building was an abandoned industrial complex, filled with rusted metal and the remnants of forgotten machines. It was the perfect place to hide, but Rhea couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't safe here. Not for long. The fight had been swift, but the bounty hunters would be back. They always came back. She had been taught to always stay one step ahead, to never stay in one place too long. But this time, it was different. She wasn't alone anymore. Rylan was with her, and she wasn't sure if that made things better or worse. He was a stranger, a human, someone who had seen her as more than a broken slave. But in the galaxy, trust was something that had to be earned. And trust, for someone like her, was something she had long since given up on. "We need to move fast," Rhea said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They'll send more. They won't stop until they find us." Raylan nodded, his face grim. "I know. I've dealt with their kind before. But we'll make it out. I promise." She didn't respond right away. He had no idea what they were up against. She had seen the galaxy's darkest corners, and the people hunting her weren't like the others. They weren't just after her. They were after something much more dangerous. As they reached the exit, the distant sound of a ship's engine cut through the silence. Rhea tensed, her body already on alert. She could feel the shift in the air, the presence of something lurking, something watching. "Get down," she hissed, grabbing Rylan and pulling him behind a stack of crates. They crouched low, holding their breath. Rhea's sharp eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. She could feel them close. Seconds passed like hours. Then she saw it. A shadow moved across the rooftop of a nearby building. It was too quick, too controlled. These weren't just bounty hunters. These were military operatives, professionals. Rhea's heart pounded. She had seen their kind before. They weren't just after money. They were after power. And they knew exactly what they were looking for. "We're being tracked," she muttered under her breath, the reality of their situation sinking in. "We need to get to the ship now." Rylan glanced at her, confusion in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Who are they?" "They're not just bounty hunters. They're soldiers. The kind of soldiers who don't leave survivors," Rhea explained, her voice tight with the weight of her past. "They've been hunting my people for years." She stood, pulling Rylan up with her. "We don't have much time. They'll be here soon." Before they could take another step, the ground shook beneath them. A loud, terrifying roar echoed through the alley, followed by the distinct sound of heavy boots hitting the pavement. It was too late. They had found them. Rhea's hand instinctively went to the weapon at her side, but Rylan stopped her. His hand was firm on her arm, holding her back. He wasn't scared. He was ready. "We fight," he said, his voice steady, unwavering. Rhea didn't hesitate. This time, she wasn't alone. This time, they were in this together. The soldiers emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden behind dark helmets. They moved with purpose, their weapons drawn and aimed directly at Rhea. The leader of the group stepped forward, his voice cold as he spoke. "Rhea Vallis, you've caused enough trouble. It's time to come with us." Rhea's eyes narrowed. She had known this day would come, but that didn't make it any easier. They had come to take her again, but this time they wouldn't win. The leader raised his weapon, signaling for his men to surround them. Rhea's heart raced, but her body was calm. She could feel the power inside her, ready to be unleashed. She wasn't a slave anymore. She wasn't a weapon for someone else's use. She was in control now. But before she could make a move, Raylan stepped forward, his voice firm and resolute. "If you want her, you'll have to go through me first." Rhea looked at him, surprised. She had expected him to be scared, to back down, but he wasn't. His stance was strong, his hands steady as he faced the soldiers. He wasn't afraid. Of them, not anymore. The leader of the soldiers chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. You think you can stop us? You're out of your depth, human. Rylan didn't flinch. Maybe, but I'm not alone. Rhea's gaze met his, and for the first time, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't known she needed. Trust. And maybe, just maybe, a chance at something more than survival. With a roar, she lunged forward, her body moving like a blur of speed and power. The first soldier never saw it coming. She disarmed him before he even had a chance to react, throwing him to the ground with one swift motion. Rylan followed closely behind, his own weapon drawn as he took on the other soldiers. The battle was brutal. There was no time to think, no. Time for fear. Rhea's body moved on instinct, her power surging with each strike. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was fighting for something greater, something she had never dared to believe in. As the last soldier fell to the ground, Rhea stood tall, her chest heaving with the exertion. She was tired, but she didn't feel defeated. This was just the beginning. Rylan stood beside her, his face grim, but filled with respect. "We can't keep running," he said, breathing heavily. "They'll keep coming." Rhea nodded. "I know. But we're not just running anymore." She turned toward the ship, her steps confident, her mind already on the next challenge. The galaxy might think she was a broken slave, a lost cause, but they were wrong. She was just getting started. The awakening of Ahira Rhea stood before the ship, her gaze fixed on the vessel in front of her. It wasn't much a small, worn-down freighter that looked as if it had been through countless battles. But to Rhea, it felt like the gateway to everything she had ever wanted. Freedom, purpose, and control. As she boarded the ship with Rylan, her thoughts were heavy. They had fought their way out of one ambush, but this was far from over. The soldiers were only the beginning. Rhea could feel it deep in her bones. Something worse was coming. Rylan followed her into the cockpit, his eyes scanning the controls with practiced ease. He may have been a soldier once, but he knew how to fly, and that was all that mattered right now. "Buckle up," he said, his voice low and focused. "We're not safe yet." Rhea didn't need any more warning. She sat in the seat next to him, her fingers instinctively brushing over the console, the ship's energy thrumming beneath her touch. It was old, but something about it felt familiar, almost like it was alive, responding to her presence. "Do you know where we're going?" Rhea asked, her voice steady despite the storm of thoughts racing through her mind. Rylan didn't look at her, but he nodded as he worked the ship's controls. "I've got a safe house on a remote planet. We'll stay there for a while until the heat dies down, but after that, we'll have to move again." Her fingers tightened on the armrest. She wasn't used to running, to hiding. All her life, she had been made to hide hidden away in cages, disguised as something weak, something lesser. But now, the idea of running again felt different. She wasn't running to survive anymore. She was running to fight. "We don't have to hide forever," Rhea said, her voice firm, filled with an edge of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Confidence. "I'm not just some broken slave you can protect. I've got power, and I'm going to use it." Rylan paused, glancing over at her. His eyes searched hers, as if trying to find the truth in her words. "I know you've got power, Rhea, but you don't know who's really after you. They've got more than just soldiers. They've got resources, influence. We need a plan. Not just power." Rhea wasn't sure why, but his words hit her harder than she expected. She knew he was right, but something deep inside her still burned with the desire to take back what was hers. She had been a weapon for so long, used by others. Now, it was her turn to decide what to do with the strength inside her. "I'll find a way," she said quietly. "But I need to know who's behind this. Who's been hunting me all these years?" Raylan's expression darkened, and for a moment, Rhea could see the weight of his own past in his eyes. He knew more than he was letting on. "The people after you are called the Syndicate," Raylan said finally, his voice quiet, almost distant. "They run everything in the shadows, the black market, the slave trade, even most of the bounty hunting factions. They control everything that happens to people like you." Rhea absorbed his words, the weight of them sinking in. She had known. There were powerful forces behind the scenes, people who made the decisions that controlled entire sectors of the galaxy. But the Syndicate? She had never heard the name before, but she could feel the truth of it now. "They're not just after you," Rylan continued. "They're after your kind, your people. You're a weapon they've been trying to capture for years." Rhea's fists clenched. The knowledge that her people were still out there, being hunted, made her blood boil. She had always thought she was alone, that she was the last of her kind. But now she understood that the galaxy had been trying to destroy her people long before she was born. "Why me?" she asked, her voice low and filled with fury. "What makes me so important?" Rylan glanced at her, his eyes grave. "You're more than just a soldier, Rhea. There's something in you, the power inside you. It's more than they can control. They want to use it for themselves. But if you learn how to harness it..." Rhea's mind raced. She had always known she was different, but now, for the first time, she began to understand just how much more there was to her than she had ever realized. "I'll stop them," she said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. "I won't let them take my people. I won't let them take me." Rylan nodded, his face a mask of resolve. "And I'll help you. We'll do this together." The engines roared to life as the ship lifted off the ground, the stars outside swirling into motion. Rhea watched as the planet below grew smaller and smaller, until it was just a dot in the distance. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast, endless, and filled with dangers. But for the first time, Rhea didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the broken slave anymore. She felt like a force that would change the galaxy forever. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was heading toward her future. And she was going to make sure no one, no matter how powerful, would stand in her way. Asterisk. The final stand, the stars outside blurred into streaks of light as the ship soared through the black expanse of space. Rhea sat at the controls, her fingers gently guiding the ship along its course. For once, the hum of the ship felt like a comforting rhythm, like the pulse of something alive, something that responded to her touch. Rylan sat next to her, eyes scanning the radar as they made their way to the remote planet he had spoken of. He had been quiet for a while, his mind clearly occupied with the gravity of their situation. The Syndicate, the people who had been pulling the strings behind her suffering, were closing in. They were relentless, and they weren't going to stop until they had her, or worse, until they destroyed her. But Rhea wasn't going down quietly. "Not anymore. We're almost there," Rylan said after a long silence, his voice filled with a certain tension. "This planet's uninhabited, but it's the perfect place to regroup. We can figure out our next move." Rhea nodded, but the thought of hiding, even temporarily, didn't sit well with her. She wasn't here to hide. She wasn't running anymore. She had a chance, no, a duty to take the fight to the Syndicate. But the power inside her, the power she had barely begun to understand, was a wild force. If she used it without control, she might just end up becoming the very thing she was fighting against. "I need to learn to control it," she said, her voice steady, though it carried the weight of uncertainty. "I need to understand what I can do." Rylan looked over at her, his expression softening. "You will. I can help you. We'll figure it out together." Rhea glanced at him, then back out at the stars. There was so much she didn't understand, so much she had to learn, not just about herself, but about the world she was fighting to change. She had always been a tool trained to be used, controlled, and discarded. But now, she was the one holding the power, and that terrified her as much as it excited her. The ship touched down with a soft thud, the barren planet stretching out before them in every direction. Dust and rocky terrain stretched endlessly, nothing but silence and isolation. As Rylan powered down the ship, Rhea stood, her legs stiff from the long flight. She needed to move, to feel the ground beneath her feet. She wasn't used to being still. It made her feel vulnerable. And vulnerable wasn't something she could afford to be right now. "Let's get to work," she said, stepping out of the ship and onto the dusty surface of the planet. Rylan followed, and together they moved toward the edge of a nearby cliff that overlooked a canyon. It was the perfect place to set up their camp and prepare for whatever was coming next. Rhea closed her eyes, feeling the wind brush against her skin, the silence surrounding her. She needed to focus. Her mind was racing, and she couldn't afford to let it spiral. The syndicate was coming. The soldiers would be relentless, and they had no idea what they were up against. She reached deep inside herself, searching for that spark of power that had been awakened in her, the power that had allowed her to fight the bounty hunters. But this time, it felt different, stronger. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, just slightly at first, then more violently. She opened her eyes in shock. Rylan stepped back, his eyes wide with concern. "Rhea, what's happening?" She closed her eyes again, focusing on the energy she could feel swirling within her. The power was there, pulsing, vibrating, growing, stronger with every breath she took. She could feel it in her blood, in her bones. But it was uncontrolled, wild, chaotic, like a storm waiting to break. Suddenly, the earth beneath her cracked, and a sharp, jagged rock shot up from the ground, nearly knocking Rylan off his feet. She gasped, stepping back. "I didn't mean to—" But Rylan caught her arm, steadying her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're getting stronger. But you need to learn to control it." Rhea exhaled slowly, her heart racing. She hadn't meant to unleash that much power, but it was clear now her abilities were growing at an alarming rate. The question was, could she control it before it consumed her? "I can't let this be the end of me," she muttered, more to herself than to Rylan. "I won't let them control me again." Rylan stood beside her, his hand still on her arm. "You're not alone, Rhea. We're in this together. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Rhea nodded, her jaw set with determination. She had no time to waste. The syndicate would be coming for her soon, and when they did, she needed to be ready. She couldn't afford any more mistakes. "We train. We prepare. And when they come," she said, her voice hard, "we make them regret ever underestimating me." As the sun began to set over the barren landscape, Rhea and Rylan spent the hours in silence, preparing for what was coming. She trained, focused on her power, learning to harness it, even as it surged and pulsed within her. But she knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy might have thought they had broken her, but they had no idea what they had awakened. And now the galaxy would learn the true meaning of fear. Asterisk.